Yeah, 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 yeah.
And this week on the Weekly Check-In.
Little fires everywhere, right? So right now we have tensions, conflicts, flare-ups, and even war in throughout the world that we all need to be paying attention to. So I want to talk about what the political, the international, and even the domestic consequences are with these wars and how we need to be responding. What are ways we could look at them? I'm actually going to start. Let's start with Africa. Let's start with the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, because for me, that's the only serious war that's going on that falls under the radar of us paying attention to that. Now, for those of you who don't know, Elon Musk, this is the connection to Elon Musk, is that he comes from a white family, who basically stole mines from indigenous people in the southern part of Africa. And this is how they made this money. And this is how he takes this money and he funds company like Tesla. Right now, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, is in a vicious war that has been going on for years. And its connections, they have many different, or the reasons why there are many different ones. So we're going to talk about it. I have a tech one, but I want to give you all the floor in terms of what do you think about this and what are the ramifications of this war?
So I want to start off by saying that all of these little wars are a threat to democracy. So I want to be very clear that it is the foundation and the tearing down of democracy. And the reason it's the tearing down of democracy is because the white supremacist world can't control democracy in the ways that it used to, because too many diverse voices have gained credence inside of that system. And so what we're seeing right now from a world global perspective is the erosion of democracy to get closer to autocracy. So to have an autocratic type of leader that can then make decisions. And so why does that matter in the DRC context? It matters because the people in the DRC have historically argued and had tribal warfare and tribal tensions from being placed together years ago through colonialization. And since then, they have found ways to kind of coexist. And now the new frontier of argument has primarily been over religion. That's what started really fueling these fires again. Why we're in complete warfare at this point has everything to do with resources and the control of those resources, in particular gold. And why are we fighting over gold again? Because we know that currency, going back to your cyber conversation and to Dame's point about Elon Musk, we know that cryptocurrencies are going to, in many ways, largely affect the economic world. So species, meaning cash, meaning money, right? Species, which are actually printed, are losing their value in the global economic space. And so what that then means is that there has to be a rush back towards resources, and the rush back towards resource that makes the most sense, especially because money at one point was back to gold, is gold. And so the fight that we're seeing in the DRC has everything to do with the erosion of democracy worldwide because of the amount of diverse voices that are in there, and because we're seeing a rush back to natural resources, and that natural resource in the DRC being gold.
Dang, these some good points.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about the humanization of some of the people that haven't had that benefit up until now, that we're starting to see in regard to all of these different places, in regard to all these wars, even the things that aren't direct, like war crimes, I guess, or direct pains from war that you are seeing. Like I know one of the biggest things that hasn't really been talked about from the conflict in the Congo is the sexual assault of women that has been going on over there. And it's been like a huge part of like I guess their war strategy. It's like a part of what they do in this war over there. And so that's one of the things that I want to see more talked about more, and it's starting to get a little traction. But also even with the Israel and Palestinian conflict, you're starting to see for the first time in CNN, World News, Al Jazeera, for the first time, they're starting to try to tell the side of the Palestinians. Because every single time there has been a flare up like this, they had the correct narrative to go with, as almost like Israel was always in defense mode. It was always Israel defending themselves. And I think this is the first time that I have seen all of these mainstream news sources actually have Palestinian journalists, Palestinian reporters, just Palestinian people who are going through it. And the reporting is even different this time, if you notice. Like now they're reporting like the deaths of the children that's going on. And that's all, like these deaths this way. It's been happening every time these conflicts flare up. But this is the first time that it's been talked about from a sympathetic scope. So I think you are going to see some different kinds of pressure now, because you can't show on TV, you know, 6 women and 2 children killed, and people, a kid discovering his dad died, and it's all on the news. That's gonna start to create a different kind of pressure for America and for anybody who claims to be against humanitarian crisis, because you're gonna have to now speak to this. You're gonna have to now try to address this. And I know everybody likes to not like to, but everyone seems to have to try to dance around it, because if you speak against Israel, it automatically turns into anti-Semitism. But at this point, it's turned into a human rights violation of other people. So we have to have that conversation as well. So I think what we're seeing is, with all these little wars, with all these conflicts, it's also, I think some of it is some of the remnants of the end of the Trump administration, and him pulling out a lot of those places, him not caring about a lot of those places. You know, it's so you seen that he, you know, when he pulled out a lot of places, it's creating a vacuum. The conflict doesn't go away. It's just, you know, so he created a vacuum. He kind of created a lot of sparks for these little fires everywhere. He kind of created a lot of these little hot spots with some of the things he did in regards to you know, going against the EU, not really messing with you know, not really messing with the what is it, the I'm slipping my mind right now.
United Nations.
Yes, United Nations. Yeah. Not really messing with United Nations. So go ahead.
Well, yeah,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, like that was the biggest thing. When you don't pay your dues, right? So to your point, Dame, about humanitarian crisis, and this is where I think the DRC
points too.
This is to me why the DRC needs to be more highlighted, because now the Middle East crisis is now usurping this humanitarian crisis conversation that you have highlighted, Dame, is that 5.2 million folks from the Congo have now been displaced because of the fact that the Congo is trying to push out these militia groups in the Eastern Congo, right? And the fact that the United States was lagging and paying their dues to the UN, which is a sizable amount. I mean, we pay a good amount of money to the UN, and because we were lagging in paying our dues, it made it difficult to then send humanitarian aid, to send peacekeeping groups, to do all of those things in the Congo, because we're talking about the Congo now, but the fighting and the flare-up actually started last year during the Trump administration. That's when we started seeing a huge influx or a huge ramp up. And this is why AFRICOM plays a role in at least alerting the rest of the African continent about what's going on. So just the same way that the AFRICOM has a double-edged sword, right? And so you don't necessarily know where to hold it, because it can cut you both coming in and cut you coming out. They are a needed force there, because at least with them there, you can track weapons. You can track movements of people. There's a coordinated conversation amongst nations when groups get to moving, whether it's through a migrant situation, meaning they're moving because war has broken out, or they're moving in military type encampments to then raid a city, or to then to cause havoc in a city. So to me, Dane, what you're saying is extremely important about the role of the UN and the United States' role in that from a financial position, and how the Trump administration be lagging and paying those dues made it difficult for then the UN to then send in peacekeeping forces to then track a lot of what's going on and then deal with these displaced persons. We haven't been able to deal with it, or the United Nations has not been able to keep up with it because of the lack of funding.
I want to say this. This even goes way before the Trump administration. So part of the there's so many different. So what we know is that in Africa, as a lot of places, because you have however many countries sharing the DRC's border, because the DRC is hella huge in Africa, all of these conflicts are leaking into, other countries. So one of the leakages is actually in the DRC is the Rwanda genocide that happened in the early 90s. So we're talking about DRC is a product of that, when you had this mass displacement of the Hutus, when you have this genocide. So these are some of the, and as we know, these borders in Africa are artificial, right? So, I mean,
they're extremely salient. They're not salient borders at all. They cross over them. There's not real patrols on them. All of those things. Yes.
But what I also mean is ethnic wise. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, Europe in 1880, was it 83, 84 with the conference that they had, which they divided Africa like a pie. They literally, like, if they went to your house and cut your house in two and said, okay, now you're Nigeria, now you're Cameroon, but you're still cousins, right? You still have these ethnic ties, but you have to share a national identity with an ethnicity that you don't bang with, right? So we're dealing with those issues, but also in the 90s, these are ramifications of the Bush administration, and when Bush was in power, all of these, these gold mine corporations begin to pop up in Africa that are all of his cronies. And I'm talking about Bush daddy, one, not Bush the son, but the first Bush, are popping up in Africa, which then lends itself to a whole what they call neo-colonialistic reality in Africa, what we see, and this is important, is in the DRC, cobalt. If you don't know what cobalt is, you need to know what cobalt is, because right now, if you are looking at Arc Republic's weekly check-in through your phone, through your laptop, or through your TV, it would not be on unless it had cobalt. 70% of the cobalt that is mined in the world comes straight from the DRC. Okay, not straight from the DRC. From
the DRC, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the humanitarian crises. There, all these reports of kids, women being forced to mine this cobalt so we can have this great technology, right? That's important. And also in my research, it said that the DRC alone has $28 trillion of untapped mineral resources. That's just in the DRC.
Untapped.
Africa is going to be the center, in my opinion,
of course. Why you think China's trying to buy it all up? Why you think China's trying to get in there and own Africa? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so to go back to Kaia's point about you're talking about the Berlin Conference of 1885.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
You're talking about the Berlin Conference of 1885. Let's be clear that the lines were drawn around resources. That's why I think what you're pointing out is extremely important. Where Cameroon stops and where Nigeria starts has everything to do with not just where the Europeans settled, but everything to do with the resources and who was going to get access to these resources. So when we're talking about the DRC and how the DRC was carved out, let's remember that the Democratic Republic of Congo has been cut up several times. The current DRC that we see is not from what we saw from the Berlin Conference. Let's remember that it was at one time Zimbabwe, Zambezi, and Zaire that was all
Right.
in that area that we're talking about, and the cutting up, and that Rhodesia, now present day Tanzania. Like, let's remember that that entire southern region has had that entire southern region of Africa, below the sub-Saharan Africa, below the Sahara Desert, has had these lines shift and mix all around resources. And to then substantiate those shifting of borders and lines, religion has been used to substantiate those movements of lines. So I think what you're saying, Kaya, is extremely important, because the minerals there, the resources there, dictate to how everything is happening. And so when we have these conversations, and this is a reason it ties back to democracy, because the centralized governments are not strong enough then to allow the varying of voices that are in the area. So not only do you have ethnic tensions because you've been cut up 12 times and you speak different languages and you eat different foods, not only do you have that, now we have different religions that are playing the part. And now as a democratic framework, we've said we're going to bring everybody in to have a conversation about how to make this work. And there are people from the outside who benefit from those voices not getting together to make it work, then to erode democracy. That is how we continuously see ourselves on this loop. To your point about, this is not just a Trump administration problem. This is a generational issues, but it's all behind the fact that I want to limit the amount of voices that have control over the resources. And democracy allows for too many voices to have a say so. And so to remove ourselves from that, Western countries are going to prop up autocrats that will then allow this level of confusion that then allows this cycle to continue to repeat itself.
Yeah, and I also want to point out too, in this area, in terms of talking about this like long history in terms of territories connected to resources and how, the Western countries have exploited these areas in Africa. Before cobalt, before, gold, you had rubber in this time, and you had cocoa. And what we're talking about in the extraction, a lot of people don't know that most cocoa is produced in Africa, exported to Belgium, and then produced and sold back into Africa and other parts of the world. But in order to extract these natural resources, the system, this goes back to the humanitarian crises that you were talking about, the system of brutality that was put in place at these cocoa and rubber plantations. Because if it wasn't for the Congo, we wouldn't have cars, because the rubber was used for tires, right? The rubber, to create rubber tires, changed the game in car manufacturing, FYI. But the system in place that was put in order for people who didn't want to be in these rubber and cocoa plantations were, if you don't work, we will chop off your hand. If you
chop off your hands,
we will chop off your feet. And there are pictures, right? Because a lot of us, the disconnection that happens, that as a result of what happened, Africans didn't know what happened to us, and we didn't know a lot of stuff that happened in Africa, right? So the system in place in terms of cutting off limbs in order to be forced to work in these plantations, in my opinion, the vestiges of that still exist, right? So because, in the DRC, the person who is doing the damage does not look like Cecil Rhodes. He does not look like an Elon Musk. He's looking exactly like your cousin or your, whatever. So this is part of this humanitarian crisis, is the vestiges of what colonialism did in terms of what people will do to their own people in order for money, power, access.
And not only that, and a direct vehicle to then blame yourself for it. Right. So it's, we said on this show, on our weekly check-in several times, white supremacy works best when they don't have to be in the room. Right. And this is a prime example of not having to be in the room. It's the same reason that for a number of years, Black families continued to beat their children, not just spank them, but beat them like they were former slaves because of what they had been conditioned and learned. It's the same thing here now. And then, just like in the American context, we blame the Black mother or the Black father for a legacy that they learned a legacy that they learned from being enslaved. The same thing here. They learned to cut each other's feet off or hands off from the brutality of a colonialized system. And now we want to come back as the UN, as these established international organizations, and say, oh, that's just so terrible that they do that to each other. Yeah, but who taught them to do it to each other?
And rape and rape, and sexual assault as a weapon, using sexual violence as a weapon. I think Dame froze, so I hope he can jump back in. But let's go to he froze.
No, I'm here.
Oh, here we go.
I'm
Okay,
here.
okay, here we go. Palestine. So we're going to end on that tangled web that is woven called Israel and Palestine. So let me just kind of, I want to start like this when we talk about this. A lot of people don't like to publicly talk about Israel and Palestine because we all know that the powers that be, if you say the quote unquote wrong thing, people have lost their jobs, they have lost their livelihoods, they have been beyond, cancel culture. And that is part of the reason why there is maybe inconsistency in terms of how Israel is discussed in converse. So I wanted to start with that. But let's talk about what's going on, because it's funky like an old batch of collard greens right now in Israel. It is a flare up, and if it is not properly handled, it will turn to a full throttle war. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So this is where I think that we need to establish the foundation. The Gaza Strip has been a place of contention between the Israelis and the Palestinians ever since the Jews resettled there after World War II. So after World War II, and there was this mass migration of standing Israel up as its own country, in many ways as a recompense for the fact of what happened to them in Europe. The area of the Gaza Strip that has several holy sites for not only Muslims but also Jews has been a constant state of fighting for forever. The peace accords. I mean, we can go back to basically since the Civil War. I mean, since the World War II, we have seen skirmishes, flare-ups in this Gaza Strip. So this is not unusual. So let's put it there. And the United States position versus the United States position with Israel versus the United States position with Palestine, to me, is not really what's really to be discussed at this moment. What's to be discussed at this moment is Bibi Netanyahu knowing that he is trying to fashion himself into being an autocrat, right? Again, this goes back to me to the breakdown of democracy across the globe. Bibi Netanyahu is trying to fashion himself into being an autocrat, and there are many Israelis who are against his type of leadership and want to return to a more democratic form of government that they once had. And to distract from the fact that he is being called out on corruption and all these crimes because he's trying to turn himself into said autocrat, he starts, like as my friends call me, the little pistol starter, starts a little pistol fight in the Gaza Strip, in a strip that is historically known for being volatile, and start something in that area by sending Israeli officials to start locking up folks at this mosque during Ramadan. So I want to be clear that to me, this is, again, to me, the foundation of this is the breakdown of democracy. And the reason, to Dame's point earlier in the segment, as to why I think the Western world being more even-handed in their coverage is because the United States is in a rock and a hard place when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu, and they would prefer him leave so that they can have a better relationship in the Middle East altogether. And that Bibi Netanyahu, in many ways, is the thorn in American side. And so, from a media perspective, it is better than to tell this story from a two-sided perspective, right? That will then allow for us as the United States to walk away from Bibi Netanyahu without walking away from Israel.
Dang.
Oh yes. So for me, and I thank you for
Wake
you
up,
know, the way
babe.
you
I
framed
saw
it.
you over there, young. See, that's what happened when you had all them kids so old. Oh, you got all these young kids running around. Tired as hell. You need to be nesting like me. You got like a 2-month-old or something. I'm just playing. Go ahead.
But yeah, I like the way she framed that, but because that goes to the point of we have to be able to talk about this fully, right? And for so long, because of the way media has handled this, you could not talk about it fully. One of the people who, he had a great point talking about how Rihanna talked about it, because I know Rihanna because she has Fenty, all these world businesses. She has to be careful about the way she talked about it. So she kind of made a post and talked about it kind of in a both sides manner, right? We have some innocent kids from Israel, innocent kids from Palestine, being committed to bomb shelters and da da da. And Mark Hill made a point to say, like, no, the kids in Palestine, they don't have bomb shelters. Kids in Israel do. The Palestinians, they don't have bomb shelters. And he's like, and we can't talk about this as if it's a one-to-one comparison, as if it's a conflict between both of them and it's going on, and they're both that's not what's happening right now. That's not what's true right now. And we know that even after they came to did I freeze?
Yeah, you freezing up. Okay. Now we see you. We see you.
Okay.
Okay. Uh-oh. You frozen. Okay. Davis.
Okay, sorry. So I don't know what's going on today. They don't let me be great.
Well, to pick up on Dame's point,
can I say something?
Go ahead.
Let me just I would say this. And me, in terms of being on the Hill and seeing people get excoriated for being at least bit of critical, like, let's talk about this Israel situation. Boom, next thing you know, you don't hear from them ever again. I would say what you're seeing in terms of we need to really address this issue are a lot of people of a lot of Jews coming out and saying that this is very detrimental. Even Bernie Sanders has talked about this, but in the New York Times, he put out this article, and it says something like, we need to stop apologizing, the United States needs to stop being an apologist for the Netanyahu government. And he says, let me just give you, he says, in a moment of crisis, the United States should be urging an immediate ceasefire. We should also understand that while Hamas firing rockets into Israeli communities is absolutely unacceptable, today's conflict did not begin with those rockets. Palestinian families in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Remember, Trump made Jerusalem, or identified Jerusalem as, Israeli when he was in office.
As the capital.
Capital, right? Israel's the capital.
BS, because
nobody agreed, right? Have been living under the threat of eviction for many years, navigating the legal system designed to facilitate their forced displacement. And over the past weeks, extremist settlers have intensified their efforts to evict them. So now you have people coming out and saying, as a Jewish person, this is unacceptable. As a Jewish person, we really need to talk about how not only is this detrimental for Israelis and Palestinians, we can't afford this in the world. Like right now, we coming out of pandemic and y'all popping off like this.
Right, but again, that's because we're trying to distance ourselves from Netanyahu, right? We are not trying to distance ourselves from Israel. We are trying to distance ourselves from Netanyahu because any level of moderate person that is engaging in the political discourse in this moment, not a Republican or a Democrat, a moderate, meaning that they're not conservative or they're not ultra liberal, right? There's someone somewhere in the middle. Every moderate knows that Bibi Netanyahu is dangerous for the entire stability of the region, and that his autocratic nature of wanting to stay is one of the biggest reasons we are seeing this flare up, right? And so to me, this article highlights that because Zionist Jews, which are the more extreme Jews, right, versus more liberal Jews, everybody's in agreement that Netanyahu needs to go. There are only extremists that want to then support him. If we go back to the Obama administration, and I hate to keep doing this, but if we go back to the Obama administration, him and Bibi Netanyahu didn't get along at all. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu, they didn't get along, so they had such a rough time. Bibi Netanyahu went and spoke to Congress before going to Obama's White House because he didn't want to deal with Obama, right? So what we're and let me carry over from something that I said on a previous show. You have to remember from the world view and from Bibi Netanyahu's view that Joe Biden is Obama's bitch for all intents and purposes. And so that makes it almost impossible.
Okay.
Right? That makes it, no, I just want to be clear about this because of how it is viewed on the world stage. Once you play second fiddle, once a white man plays second fiddle to a black man, there are international repercussions for that. Now, and what I mean by international repercussions, many of them have been favorable, right? Because Joe Biden did what he did, it made him favorable in other parts of the world. But when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu in particular, it did not. So that's why I feel like what Dame is saying about the humanitarian, the telling of this media story in a more even-handed way. The idea that humanitarianism is going to save the day and highlight the atrocities of Bibi Netanyahu, to me, is going to get us to an end that's going to get us closer to Palestinian equity. Because to your point, Israel has the Iron Dome that has protected them from many of the rockets that have been fired, a dome that the Palestinians do not have.
Good point. And, for the record, prior to Trump, the United Nations, there have been so many organizations and so many public officials that have come out and said that what is going on in this region is not only detrimental, but it is unfair, and a lot of people are being hurt as a result of it. And even though the Biden administration did not expect for this to happen in such an early time, because the focus was on the United States, it is a shit or get off the pot type of situation. What you gonna do, boo-boo? What are you going to do to put out these little fires that will definitely become forest rages?
If you wanna see good news, you don't see on regular TV, from another perspective, something relative to your needs. And we gonna have deep subjects, and we gonna turn the lens, and there's no topic we won't skip, so please don't miss weekly, tune in weekly to check in, weekly check in, weekly check in, weekly check in.